in my dreams, I have 3 PhDs. My background is persuasion-oriented communications. I was in public relations and advertising, doing sales and training videos about, 25 years ago, started that aspect. And about 13 years ago, at a spiritual retreat, we were invited to remind God that our talents belong to Him and ask what He would like us to do with them. And I felt that I should do more than just be on the board of a crisis pregnancy center in my community, that I should take my video skills. And so I started berating our local, that's not the right word, television studios to say, let's do a documentary about the health risks of abortion. Surely the health risks of abortion, we're not talking the humanity of the pro-life or the humanity of the unborn, but just what could be wrong with talking about the health risks. And so that was kind of my introduction to the world of repressed information. And so it was disappointing and shocking to me. And over those last 15 years, we just see more and more, and not just in our area, of 2 sets of information out there in the world, the truth and then the repressed information that you only hear about in conferences like this or DVDs, etc. And even on the internet now, we're finding increasingly the truth is being shut down as junk information, whatever. So my role has been to take the scientific information that's been done by researchers, 2 of whom are here with us for sessions later, and put that in a form that the average person can access, understand, but not dilute it in a way that's offensive to a physician who's looking at it. So over the years, for some of you who may not know these things, when you get involved in something, you forget what people don't know. So just as a quick thumbnail of the health risks of abortion. So again, we're not talking, obviously the health risk is pretty bad for the baby, but for the mother herself. And to me, this conference is so vitally important because Jackie may not realize how important it is for the woman to know the damage to her body, because up to half of the women who choose to abort know they have a baby inside them, and they abort anyway. So because of pressure on them, that's a different discussion. But so my thought with this conference is you'll learn some of the health risks that are going to occur to that woman. Might that help her choose to carry that baby to term? So, for example, preterm birth is arguably the most inarguable. The United States Institute of Medicine, which is the highest medical ranking in the states, the U.S. Congress looks to it for the definitive information on health, and that institution calls preterm birth linked to abortion as immutable. So you Google that, that's inarguable. Science is well settled, and part of the research was done by Brian Calhoun, who is here, and associate of mine I've been lucky to work with in Vancouver, Brent Rooney. So preterm birth doesn't sound bad, actually. It sounds like you have pictures of cute little babies, like, what's wrong with that? Well, it's a mess. Abortion links to especially, they're called very premature babies. And very premature babies, first of all, half of them die. So that's a loss to the mother that, as a man, I can't fully grasp. The half that live, if they're lucky, they have learning disabilities. Apparently I have some, so I can empathize a little bit with those guys. But that's the good news. Not so good news, they have cerebral palsy. They have autism. They have epilepsy, blindness, deafness. 85% of the marriages that have such a challenged child break up. So now you have the mother alone with these added burdens. In Canada, the cost might be largely paid for by OHIP, whatever. In the States, that's not true, so it wipes out the family that way. but it wipes out the family here emotionally as they try to drive around to special clinics to help this child. My daughter is a physiotherapist, works with cerebral palsy kids. Interestingly, I said, one of the causes of that is abortion. Of course, she hadn't been taught that. So if you have a premature child, also increases your risk of breast cancer. So the link between breast cancer and abortion also been understood for 100 years. When a woman comes of age, she develops breasts. Upwards of 85% of her breast tissue is not yet mature. And God has created those breast tissues to only mature when she lactates her child. So when she's pregnant, those breasts immediately start to enlarge, more breast tissue. And when she aborts, she has even more breast tissue that's never been matured. Interestingly, Janet Smith this morning talked about maturing men. Well, the best way to mature a man, have a child, and a woman matures in God's plan as she has the baby, and those breasts, then that 85% of the tissue becomes cancer resistant. So until then, a woman's breasts are susceptible, and so this has been known, as they say, for 100 years because nuns would get breast cancer. So new study, fetal abnormalities, women abort those instead of carrying them to term, and 40% of those women regret it for the rest of their lives. So it's important for women to just bring that baby to term, have the joy of it in her arms, and as horrible as it is to die in her arms, that's ultimately more satisfying to her. New thing also to me, autoimmune diseases rising, and the speculation as it relates to microchimerism, which means the baby cells interchanging with the mother cells in a way that's not healthy. And so the mother's body is saying, hey, what are all these foreign materials? And so the body's getting sensitized. So again, the mother's body being sensitized to matter that it's saying shouldn't be there. And when the baby's aborted, there's like 8 times more of these cells that are released into the mother. So how much of the autoimmune system that apparently is now like one of the 3rd most common problems in America is related to this uptick of abortion? And to me, the heart of it is the marketing slogan called abortion is safer than childbirth. And that was floated in the 1960s without really a study. But on paper, if you eliminate a whole bunch of data, it looks like it's true. But in the same way I might say, well, my car is free. I turn the key and I go to the store and buy something, come back and I haven't spent a nickel, so my car is free. So in the same way, statistics used to justify that claim, abortion is safer than childbirth, have eliminated a whole long range of facts. So how do we counter that? One of the things I've done just in the last week, actually finished a DVD that uses the experts, some of whom are in this room and others I've interviewed, that explain how this research that's absolutely crystal clear is distorted, how it's skewed, who is doing the skewing of the data that prevents the person on the street, even the media person. You can't expect the media person to report on a breast cancer risk when he goes to the National Breast Cancer Association, whatever, and they say, yeah, there's no connection there. So so this DVD, I want it to be available to all of you. If you're affiliated with Jackie in any way, she'll be sending you some information about it. You'll be able to download the video, see what it is. I brought 10 packages, so I'm trying to put them in the hands of people, especially those who are further away, like into the States. So please talk to me about that if you'd like that. And I'm pricing them at $1 each. And the great news is one of the best books on that is from DeFever. It's a textbook of all the women's health risks, and it is actually on this DVD that I want you to be giving away at a cost of $1 in bulk. So a 444-page textbook on a DVD. The DVD includes 3 videos, the one I just mentioned on how this information is skewed. And the reason that's important, I'm not sure I made it clear, is because that line, abortion is safer than childhood, is what's used to break the laws of abortion that are around the world. So pressure on the legislator to undo their protection laws. He knows, she knows that he's killing an unborn child, but he succumbs because he believes that lie, that abortion is ultimately better for the mother. So by, to me, cutting to the heart of that lie, that will help us spread the message more effectively than not really addressing that. Because when you say to a woman, well, you can get breast cancer, you can get preterm birth, your future children, she can say to herself, well, that doesn't really matter because it's still safer to abort. So to me, that's important. So that's it for me. Ask me any questions. Come up to me if you don't think you're not in touch with Jackie enough to get that mail out, and we'll get this DVD going in the next number of weeks, months, as we get the orders in. Mm-hmm.
How long is the video? The DVD?
Well, the DVD is 3 videos, okay. One on the emotional risks of abortion, which is actually, it's 26 minutes on this DVD. And I cut off the third part of the DVD is of the emotional risk is how these women got healing. That's not on the DVD. If you think that should be on because of the healing, it becomes through Christ. If you think that should be on the DVD, you tell me and we'll find a way to get that on the DVD. So emotional risks, how the women became pregnant, how they were pressured into it, they got raped, whatever. Angelina is one of the people interviewed in the DVD. Second part of the DVD is the physical risks of abortion, which includes a 5-minute introduction to doctors pointing out to them that they can lose their medical malpractice coverage if they are not sharing with patients information such as preterm birth and breast cancer. Even if that doctor doesn't agree with it, if a doctor intentionally overlooks information that could be true, he can lose his medical malpractice because he was intentionally violating something. And then the third part of the DVD, 47 minutes, is the new documentary about the skewing, how the data is skewed. So I don't know that any video has ever attacked specifically this thing of the data, how it's skewed, how it's distorted, how it's repressed, the organizations. It's a who's who. And it's pretty nasty. In fact, I'm surprised at some of the things that are on this. We look at doctors as sort of like gods, and they can be callous and uncaring and refusing to change, and that's all in the DVD.
Is that in Canada and the U.S. the doctors have to do this?
Especially the U.S. I haven't been able to check into the Canadian aspect. What I find is these laws they spill over just because an insurance company isn't going to cover you when you intentionally violate whatever it is. But there are other laws, even if that specific one doesn't. Informed consent is a law in Canada, and doctors aren't doing that. So Brent Rooney's been mentioned. He's collecting informed consent forms, and none of them communicate clearly to the woman. And even if the consent form did communicate clearly to the woman, that's not enough. The courts have already said the surgeon needs to look the woman in the eye, or the man, whatever the surgery is, and say, do you understand, here are the risks? And if they haven't done that, they can be sued for medical malpractice. In the States now, there is a law firm that's taking on cases for free if you have a cerebral palsy child and you had an abortion. So I believe that what's going to bring this abortion industry to a crashing halt is something like this, a financial thing where the insurers pull out and say, we're not covering you anymore because we're gonna get cleaned. And I have a background in the insurance and reinsurance industry, and you can be sure the insurance industry is way more concerned about this than the person on the street. It could bankrupt them. Yes?
I think I missed the name of this DVD.
Are you affiliated with Jackie Jeffs? You'll get the information. It's just about the childbirth safer than abortion. Okay.
Would it be appropriate for high school students, the information on this?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you're going to get a link that you can download this video, this latest video. You can download it, put it in your computer, use it, show it. But that won't be, the DVD is different. The DVD is a physical thing. And the reason you want something physical is because people will handle something physical. There's still room in the world for snail mail, for DVDs, because it's physical. I have to do something with it. You put it in your basket. You don't get to it this week. It comes back to you a week or two later. Emails, they get lost. So there's benefit to tangible. Yep.
I just wanted to give you my opinion about whether or not you should include price, and I think you should. And I think also it gives an opportunity to talk about ministries like Rachel's Vineyard and
Yeah.
places like that. And I think that a lot of women have had.
Yeah. And it's the third part of the DVD. Yeah, it's only 9 minutes long. Yeah. Should be in there. How many think it should be in there? There we go. Is that quorum? Close enough?
Two versions.
Well, I think the version will be in there. It'll be in there, but it won't carry on as the original. You'll say, I'll have a title if you want to see the conclusion of this, how the women find healing. Click here, and it'll bring it up on the DVD. Yeah.
It's an option.
Yeah, it'll be an option to them. It won't blast them in the face. I mean, in the States, you wouldn't even worry about it. You just do it. In Canada, like, we're so sensitive. It's the darkness here. This is standing to move on. All right. Any other questions? Great.
How long was the version on the video on physical risk? You said
17 minutes.
17.
Yeah. These videos are in their full length on Christian Cinema, which is a pay-per-view. So I'd love you to go to Christian Cinema, look up Wounded and Abandoned, and pay-per-view so that they begin to think, yeah, there are people that want to watch this. Wounded and Abandoned, or you see my name's in front of you. Actually, it's spelled, Christian Cinema, Wounded and Abandoned. I think you'll find them. So the two, and they are the full-length ones. Not that I'm cutting anything on the DVD on purpose, just to make it fit.
The pieces you gave me, will I hand them out here? Do you want me to?
It's, you call that, whatever works for you. Yeah. So it's exciting to me. Hopefully it can rub off on you a bit. All of the initiatives here, everybody's got different initiatives, and somehow we have to keep it all in balance and get the job done. And if you ask me a really hard question, as I mentioned, Joel Bryant is here. He's the specialist on breast cancer. I think the most powerful reason not to abort my baby is breast cancer. I think that trumps everything else. And preterm birth, Dr. Brian Calhoun is here to talk about preterm birth and extreme preterm birth. So they are in the video that I'm talking about. Thank you.
Keith, you can stay there because there may be questions at the end, if that's all right.
to the end there.
Oh, well, up to you. Keith said that we were sensitive in Canada. You'll excuse my English observations, but I think we're stupid in Canada as far as having the truth out there is concerned. And as far as consent, I mean, I've done a lot of support, pregnancy support over the years. And, I've had one young woman, and I gave a presentation on fetal development. And she was absolutely distraught after it. I didn't even speak about abortion. And she just had an abortion 3 weeks before of an 18-week-old child. And her physician had told her that the baby was just cells and was not alive yet. So we know that they're not being told the truth. And one young woman, whenever I'm presenting, I always tell them to ask them to show you the screen. When they do the ultrasound, get them to turn it to you, because they don't. And she was told, the technician said, you're not allowed to see it. And she said, well, I'm walking out if I don't see it. And when they showed her the screen, her baby was 14 weeks. She saw her baby, and the technician had said it was the size of a peanut. And she said, that doesn't look like a peanut to me. So she went out of that facility. Now, just a couple of little things I've had. I'm sure those of you out there have had many, many stories too. But we do know that women are not being told the truth about the abortion procedure. And if this country wants to try and, maintain some sort of honor, if it's having abortion allowed, if we're going to accept this, then women need to understand what they're walking into. And at the moment, they really do not. So anyway, I'm not on the panel. Sorry about that. But I'm on TV. Hi, Herman. So this is a bio about, I did bring yours up here, Teresa.
Nobody cares.
No, they don't. They do. I care. Well, Teresa, when I first read it, it said she's in her 16th year, but I know you're older than that. Anyway, I read on as Director of Family Ministry for the Diocese of Hamilton. She has her Master's in Religious Education from St. Augustine's Seminary, University of Toronto, a degree in Kinesiology from McMaster University. I'm glad I could say that. A Bachelor of Education from Brock University, and is certified in a number of family, counselling, marriage and relationship programs. She's been Executive Director of Birthright Pregnancy Service in Hamilton for 31 years, and in 2004 implemented and now oversees Project Rachel in the Hamilton Diocese. She is passionate about helping individuals, couples and families to grow strong, healthy and happy in both how they live and in their faith. She believes her most important role is in her family as a wife of Joe, mother to her 4 children, and grandmother to 5 beautiful grandchildren. And when you see her, you'll know why they are beautiful. Anyway, come on, Teresa, okay?
Well, I'm very happy to be with you today. An opportunity, probably maybe not to share what you don't know, but to maybe rein it in, if you will, and just get us to thinking about it again. When Jackie asked me, those of us on the panel have not discussed what we were going to be presenting, and I knew that you would hear lots about the actual physical, the breast cancer, those types of things. So I'm focusing more on, if you will, the experiential stuff of dealing with the women directly. So you see on the screen there, abortion, women's health and healing, and the word hope underneath it. And I think that's the key. For 31 years, you heard I've been with Birthright in Hamilton. I came to Birthright when my first son was born. He's 36 years old now. I was only 10 when he was born. And when I had him in the hospital, he was born. I wanted to be a mother since I gave up playing with dolls. I couldn't wait to be a mother. And so there he was, and they took him off. In those days, they took them away to give them a bath, and he was born on Father's Day, so my husband had zipped home to have a shower. He was born at 6:30 in the morning, so they brought him back to me before my husband was back. And I looked down at this little being, and for the first time in my life, I really was impacted by what abortion is. I looked at this baby, and I thought, this is what we're talking about. And Jim Hughes is here somewhere in the room. He won't remember, but when I was in high school, he came to my high school to speak, and they showed us pictures, and so I understood what abortion was. I understood I would never have an abortion. I thought it was wrong, but I'd never been involved, and I decided at that moment that I needed to do something. And he was born on a Sunday, as I just said, Father's Day, so the following Sunday when we were at church, it was in the bulletin that Birthright was looking for volunteers, and I thought, that's what I can do, help the women directly. I did not know how profoundly that moment would impact the rest of my life. It has directed, in a sense, everything I've done, and the reason I work as director of the family ministry is because of the pro-life movement. There's no doubt it's changed everything, because when you become involved in birthright, you have to study sexuality, you have to look at what's happening in the world, you have to look at the impact of abortion, you begin to see how women are being lied to, that's the only way we can say it, and you begin to see a lot of things. Tomorrow, I'll just start by saying this quickly. Tomorrow I'm giving a retreat. It's a busy weekend for me, so I can hardly be here with you, which I'm saddened about. I'm giving a retreat, and the retreat title is God's Plan Includes You. And I want to start with that line because you're all here, and I know many of your faces, and some of you have worked for way longer than I have even in the pro-life movement. And at times we might feel, is there hope? Is there hope? Because the world seems to have gone mad. But the truth is, as long as our voice is here, those that refuse the truth cannot take control, because we're niggling at them, we're telling the truth, we're reminding people. And I believe this is the tip of an iceberg. Yes, here in this room, a little tiny tip. There's a lot of us. If we somehow come together, I think we can win this battle. So let's talk about some of the things that I see and know. This is one of my grandchildren. You slip them in when you can. Life is precious, and we all know that. The truth is, the world knows that too. We have to convince them now that that precious being, when I put that picture up in a high school classroom and I asked the young people, would it be okay for me to slam that baby down and hurt it or kill it? Absolutely not. What would you do? Well, I'd run and try to get it. They have all kinds of things that they do. And I say, all those of us who understand about life are saying is that from the very beginning, we offer the same protection. We've got to take it out of the realm of that we're against people and put it into the realm that we're for this precious being that's in the womb. So this is just a little piece. Every truth passes through 3 stages before it's recognized. In the first, it's ridiculed. In the second, it's opposed. And in the third, it's regarded as self-evident. I believe we will get to the self-evident stage, but we have to keep speaking the truth until at some point the truth can no longer be denied, and then people will finally say, what were we thinking? How many times have we had that in different things over in history? So let's look first very quickly. Because of my involvement with Birthright, I wanted to house the first part is in, we must understand, and many of you here do and have done some counseling, about why people are afraid and why they choose abortion when they have an unplanned pregnancy. In today's world, we of course have the addition now. I see Hope and Turmoil is there that can support that. We have more people choosing abortion because there's something wrong with their child. But we still have a lot of people who have abortions because of fear. And it can come across as casual, as they don't care, that they're just going to have this abortion. But I can tell you this, I have counseled over 1,000 people at Birthright, and all but one have not wanted to have an abortion. Many have, I'm sad to tell you. Most of them do not want to, but they have these issues. So there's fear when there's an unplanned pregnancy. Because their minds are in a fear state, it interferes with the way the brain works. Can't go into the detail, don't have time, but I could tell you that if we had time. It doesn't allow them to make a good decision. And so they often see this as a life-ending, not a life-altering moment. And certainly, even if we can move them to life-altering, they don't see it as a positive life-altering moment. We have to understand the mentality. We can only fight what people are believing to change something. So we have to understand the mentality of what goes on. Why are they afraid? They're feeling very much afraid of anyone finding out, especially parents, but there's been many other reasons people have given over the years. They're afraid of losing their job. They're afraid of being kicked out of school. They're afraid of their pastors knowing because they're involved in their church. There's a lot of fear, and although they come off as aggressive, when you get behind the aggression, it all comes down to fear. They don't feel supported by anyone in their lives. In particular, as you see their medical support. Because now if you come in and you say, I wasn't planning on being pregnant, no one gives you the truth, as you just heard Alex say. They tell you, well, you want an abortion. This isn't a good time for you. You'll be able to have children later on in life. Nothing about what it might do to you or that it might impact those children that you have. They feel that their future is over. This moment is going to change everything I had planned. And so that's why they feel they have to die to themselves. That's serious business. So we have to be able to help them with those things. We have to be able to say it is not life-ending. It is maybe life-changing, but that's not always a negative thing. And they feel that they have to choose. It's their life or the baby's life. And at that point in time, before they're connected to the baby, many of them are too afraid to choose the baby's life over what they consider their own. They're afraid of having the means to care for their children. And so most of you, many of you here, are involved in emergency pregnancy services or in Right to Life organizations that offer those kinds of supports. A lot of people don't know about them. We are unfortunately not rich, most of us. And so our advertising is not as, we can't put commercials on TV, we don't have a lot of ways to get at the people. But here in this room, I'm seeing so many dedicated people. And if we talk to 10 people and they talk to 10 people, we've got social media now. We've got a lot of ways to touch base. We've got to use everything we have to make sure people know there is help for you, not judgment. Every time someone believes they'll be judged, they will not come for help. My children are a perfect example. From the time they were little, I talked to them about their body parts and what their real names were. We were open to any discussion around sex or sexuality, and their friends and they continued to come to us all throughout their teen years. If they had felt a question would be judged, they would have stopped talking to me. It's the same here. It's a careful and difficult line because we want to speak the truth about abortion, but we also have to be careful that our words don't make people think, I'll never go to those people for help. We have to be careful. They're worried that they don't have enough support from people and that they'll lose their friends, their family, their boyfriend, sometimes their husband, but often it's more likely a boyfriend. This is a time of trial. This is a time of facing something I never thought I would face. And I don't know how to proceed. And if I proceed, everyone's going to have to know. If I have an abortion, which everybody knows about, there's no hiding that, maybe no one has to know. And so we have to help them see that that moment, that bridge to the next step is an important one to take. They have 3 choices, yes? And they all know. They know what they are. In today's world, there's really only 2 choices that most of them will consider. They will consider abortion or raising their baby because adoption has become so negative. That how could you give your child away? What about the person that's going to beat them and all that? And anyone who's an adoptive parent knows it's a beautiful life for many of these young children to be welcomed into families lovingly. And so we have to help change the understanding and the attitude. But we also have to know that in this world, unless they come to one of us, they have one choice, and that is abortion. In fact, because we are in Hamilton and because we have McMaster and we have Mohawk, very often I have students come who are doing projects and they tell me right off the bat, I'm interviewing you because I want the other side, but I want you to know I'm pro-choice. I say, I'm very glad you're here. And then I talk to them about the 3 choices and about what the other places offer and about the fact that I've seen over 1,000 women and probably half of them, I don't have an exact number, have ended up having abortions, and only one wanted the abortion. So whose choice was it really? And when they leave, they're confused, and I'm glad. I want them to think about that. So, why do people have difficulty after abortion? I will tell you that one consistent thing that happens on the Project Rachel line, they phone in to us. We send them to individual counselors throughout the diocese, and sometimes they call from other places, so we find someone in that area to send them to. I'm amazed that I would say 8 out of 10 people who call the line say, please tell people this is not the solution everyone tells you it will be. And I consistently say the same thing back to them. I hope someday you'll find your voice and be able to speak, because it's a powerful voice when we hear someone who's experienced it. So, why? Because women have mixed feelings. give me the high sign when I've got 5 minutes, Jackie. Women have mixed feelings about abortion. Most women who have abortions do not agree with abortion. In fact, prior to being pregnant, they may have said, I would never have an abortion, but suddenly I'm going to have to tell someone, my parents or whoever I'm afraid of, and so I have mixed feelings going in. They may be directly violating their own moral code. There are many people who are very Christian, Catholic, or very faithful in their other religious faith who are opposed to abortion until they face it, and it's there as the option out, getting me away from this fear. Women may feel that they're forced by others to abort, and they certainly do, and afterwards there's anger and bitterness. Many women lose contact with the people who were in their lives at the time of their abortion, their supports, their siblings, their parents, their boyfriend, their other friends, because no one supported them. They have limited disclosure, we just heard that, about the abortion procedure and the consequences of it. One of the things we always say at Birthright is we can share that with you, but we would tell you, find out. Ask your doctor specifically about the procedure. Because if you have a tooth out, you know what you have to hear about. This, that, there could be infection. You have an abortion, they just say, we'll make the appointment for you. There's limited information given. Late-term abortions are more challenging because people have felt their babies move. There's a whole different experience. They have seen their baby growing, if not externally. There is issues often related to women who want children later in life and can't get pregnant, or who get pregnant. On the Project Rachel line, I can tell you that at least half of our calls, when we pick up, there's a baby crying in the background. They've had their first baby, and now, like me, I hadn't had an abortion, but it had an impact on my life. They look at this baby and they say, this is what I aborted. This is what I aborted. And they're living in an environment where abortion is kept secret. And I did write in there, although this may be changing because now we're having celebration parties and all kinds of things. But I will tell you that that is the media world. For the everyday average person, they don't tell anyone. When they call Project Rachel, I ask them, have you had support? Does anyone know that you've had an abortion? And more than half have told no one. And the ones that have told someone have maybe one person they've shared it with that they've been trying to support. So they're living with what they consider to be a horrific thing that they've done, feeling bad about themselves and telling no one about it. So they're in pain too. And so when I'm in pain, I have to try to get away from that pain. I find a way to cope with that pain. And one of the things we do at Project Rachel is to try to help them deal with it. We know that most people need to grieve the loss. And Project Rachel, Rachel's Vineyard is the same, takes them through a grieving process to help them face, know their child, grieve their child, and pass their child on to where they are in a safe environment so that they can move forward and live with what's happened. And so people prior to that, prior to reaching out, often develop defense mechanisms, and this is what we see in the world. First, some might have one of these, some might have all four of these. First, they rationalize. There are reasons for making it okay. I was too young, I didn't have the money, no one would support. There's all kinds of, we make it all up, and you don't understand when you tell me abortion is wrong, that I had to have this, so I'm rationalizing the decision. Repression, block it out. People will tell me, I know I had an abortion, I have the date written in a calendar, but I have no recollection of it until something happens to take away these defense mechanisms. The third is this compensation. They make up for the abortion by doing good works, by having another child, by trying to make up for the bad thing that they did. Many of my own volunteers at Birthright will say to me, you think I'm a good person, but I am not. My life has been a lie, if you will. And then they have this reaction formation where they push down the feelings and allow the opposite feelings. So some of the people you're seeing angry on the lines and all that, they're angry because it's the only way to justify what I've done. I can't think about it. I have to justify what I've done. And so something happens in life. It can be good or it can be bad. And I no longer can repress, keep this down, make these mechanisms stay in place. And I begin to cry unexpectedly. I begin to cry all the time. I feel terrible about myself. Those are the people that reach out to Project Rachel. Some of them it's 3 weeks after their abortion. Some of them it's 60 years. But it happens eventually to almost all people. So the people who come to us, some of them are freshly after abortion, some many years. Women who are newly pregnant will call because, again, they're experiencing something good. Many who have had abortions and have recently given birth, and women who have had abortions and cannot conceive now are grieving the loss of that one child they may have had. Men come, the husbands, partners who might have had a part in the decision but might not have had a part. Family who are related to those experiences. Maybe they supported it, maybe they did not know. Many times we'll have grandparents call who say, I never even knew that my daughter or son, they were going to have a baby, and I found out now, and I just can't get that little one out of my head. Siblings, grandparents, etc. So any family relatives. And then sometimes we get a professional who will call. They realize, many of you here, if not all of you here, have probably seen the movie Unplanned. Not unlike Abby Johnson, at some point they say, what have I been doing? And now they have to grieve, as you saw her in the movie, weep over that. So a lot of people are impacted by abortion. Often students are extremely impacted if a friend tells them and they're against abortion and the friend has the abortion, they feel they've failed. So we have to be careful because we live in a world where you can't be anywhere where someone hasn't been impacted by the abortion. And our words always have to speak the truth in love so that we make sure we're not doing any damage. So we know that people have to grieve. We know that people have difficulty. We know that people will turn to various other methods of drinking, drugs, sometimes promiscuous behavior, et cetera, et cetera. You've heard all this before. And so we have to be compassionate. Many times people who are struggling in life, who we don't know have had abortion, the struggle is because of the abortion. One of the reasons at Project Rachel, we like them to see professional counselors so that when the onion begins to be peeled back, they can get help for everything and not just this one thing. So life is precious. We all believe it. We all know it. We know that we want these little ones to be protected, but we equally should, and I think do, want moms and dads and doctors and nurses and everyone to be protected. And we have to continue to find a way to move forward. So it's not you who shapes your people, it is God who shapes them. If they are the work of God, await the hand of the artist who does all things in due season. Gently help them to offer their hearts soft and tractable, and keep the form in which the artist had fashioned them. Gently help them to let their clay be moist, lest they grow hard and lose the imprint of his fingers. We are called to compassionate care. Those who experience abortion and then experience the love of someone in caring for them, I firmly believe will eventually be the voice that ends abortion. We have to keep being present to them and for them so that can happen. Okay?
We will have time at the end of the whole session for more questions in case anything comes up while the speakers are here. And I would, I'm going to call on Angelina Steenstra right now, but I would also like to thank Dr. Calhoun because one of our speakers hasn't come up, so I've asked him if he wouldn't mind coming up and just talking about the preterm birth and abortion connection. So thank you, Dr. Calhoun. But I would like to introduce she's my sister really, except not in blood, right? You are. Angelina Steenstra is the National Coordinator of the Silent No More Awareness campaign. And the first campaign event held outside the United States took place in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, on Parliament Hill on May the 13th, 2004. That's 15 years. That's amazing. Women and men told their stories of regret, raising awareness about the physical, spiritual, and emotional harm caused by abortion. Our darling girl here is regional coordinator. She's a national coordinator. And with the support of her husband, Walter, where is he? There he is, over there. Angelina has brought a message of hope and healing to many around the world through her personal testimony. I've missed a little bit out, but I don't want to be here. I want you to hear Angelina. So here she is.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a blessing to be here with you and so many familiar faces, which prompts me to ask a couple of questions. How many people here are here for the first time? Okay, wonderful. And how many have never been to the March for Life in Ottawa? A couple. Okay. Oh, a number. Well, I'd like to just for those who've heard the story before, I invite you to just ask the Lord to draw out the parts of the story that might be relevant to those that are gathered here today that have never heard the short but long story of abortion in my life. But also I want to raise awareness about the Silent No More awareness campaign. Before we start, could we just bow our heads in prayer? We come before you, Lord, in gratitude for the freedom to gather, the freedom to speak, the freedom to hear the truth from so many truth tellers. We ask, Lord, that you would open our ears and our eyes to give us your heart, that we might be your faithful witnesses, that we might serve you in the vineyard to bring our brothers and sisters to the truth and to freedom. We ask that you would draw the parts of the story out of my heart today that you want to share with those you've gathered. Heavenly King, Consoler, Spirit of Truth, present in all places and filling all things, treasury of blessings, giver of life, come, dwell in us, cleanse us from all stain, and save our souls, O good one. We ask our Blessed Mother to intercede for us. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. The Silent No More awareness campaign was begun by two women in the United States, Janet Morana, Executive Director of Priests for Life, and Georgette Forney, Executive Director of Anglicans for Life. And what prompted them to begin the campaign was the 30th anniversary of Roe versus Wade in the United States, and they wanted to bring the attention to the wider circle of victims. We know that the focus, the epicenter of abortion is the child who dies, the children whose lives are ended. But we also know that for every single abortion, there are many, many lives touched. And so in 2003, the 30th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, Janet and Georgette brought together about 60 women to share their testimony in front of the Supreme Court after the National March for Life in Washington, D.C. And it was a counter gathering, if you will, in front of Supreme Court to counter the celebration of people that belong to the National Organization of Women and NARAL. And every year they would gather in front of Supreme Court for a candlelight vigil to celebrate Roe versus Wade. And they, Janet and Georgette, wanted to bring to the world's attention that there are many people who are not happy after abortion. I read about this gathering in our national pro-life newspaper, The Interim, and I had been carrying really a prayer in my heart for many years, since a pro-life conference in 1999, asking the Lord to raise up men and women across the country who would stand shoulder to shoulder and tell the truth about what abortion had done to their lives, to break into the stronghold of lies and bring down those walls that hold people captive, that hold them prisoner, that affect the wider circle of immediate family, of extended family, of communities, of provinces of our country, and ultimately the world. And when I read about this event that took place, I had a strong urge to go and participate when I heard that they were going to repeat the gathering in 2004. And I was doing that for a personal reason. My first pregnancy took place in the context of a date rape. I was 15 years old. When I exposed my situation to what I thought was a helpline, abortion was recommended. I was told how to lie and to gather up the $250 American that I would need to go to this abortion facility, which I believed was located on Yonge Street in Toronto, but in fact it was a front to funnel women across the border. So, 15 years old, trying to hide what I had done, gone to a party, lied about my whereabouts, experienced rape, conceived my first child. I wanted to cover that all up. And I believed that I could just turn back the page by following the directions and going to this abortion facility. Years later, I would be led into post-abortion ministry, and then eventually I began doing that in 1992, and then eventually I would hear about this gathering in the United States. So I was going for really personal reasons. I wanted to make a pilgrimage on behalf, in memory of, my first child, Sarah Elizabeth, who died on American soil. Sarah died in 1972 on July the 15th. I'd never done anything in America to commemorate her very short life and death. She was about 12 weeks gestation. It took a lot of courage to make that trip across the border with that intention. At some level in my being, I really was reliving the day of the abortion. I crossed the border in Buffalo. I remembered, I brought together the pieces of the story that I had not remembered as we crossed, when we were asked what our citizenship was. We made our way to Washington, and I shared my testimony. And I had been invited to bring the campaign to Canada, but I wasn't really sure that I was up for that. I'd done a lot of post-abortion ministry, I'd spoken a lot publicly, but it was always in the context of something like this, where there are friendly faces, people who welcome and don't judge, and who really, I've never, ever experienced rejection in the pro-life movement because of my story. But I wasn't so sure that if I would bring the campaign to Canada, that I would have that kind of courage to become a person who moved in a secular world on perhaps CBC or newspapers, and how would I deal with that kind of public experience? So I was very much afraid to take that on, but it really was a call. And as I shared my testimony in Washington that day, January 22nd, 2004, I was convicted that I needed to respond on behalf of Sarah Elizabeth's short life and death, but more importantly, to stand on guard for Canada. With over 300 abortions a day in Canada, there isn't, as, oh my gosh, Teresa, I just lost your name. As Teresa was saying, there isn't a household in this country that isn't touched by abortion. So the campaign came to Canada in 2004 to educate, to reach out, first and foremost, to those that are hurting after abortion. And by our witness, by standing up, by finding the courage to speak the truth honestly, we could reach out to our brothers and sisters and let them know they're not alone. So many people are isolated in their pain after abortion, and they don't know that there is help available, that what they're feeling is not unique to them. It is there are many common things that are common to men and women who've had the experience of abortion in their life. So the first goal of the campaign is to reach out to those that are hurting and let them know that help is available. The second goal is to educate the public. And when I was first drawn into sharing my story publicly, really through my working it out, because it's a journey, it's not a one-time event. Integrating an abortion experience into one's life is a process. And my life is dynamic, not static. So how I integrated that experience into my life when I was 30 is quite different than how it becomes integrated into my life as a woman much older in my now early 60s. So that process requires courage, and courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is fear overcome by prayer. Even today, to stand once again before you, to speak, takes courage. I always shake my boots before I stand here to speak. I really don't always know what I'm going to say, and that's part of the vulnerability. But the good news is that every time I share my testimony, God uses it for good. Romans 8:28, all things work unto good for those who love the Lord and live according to his purposes. And as I've grown in my relationship with the Lord and grown in my love, I've found the courage to always say yes to the invitations. So the first line of education really has been in the pro-life movement across the country. Speaking personally has helped others to walk through their own pain, has helped others to speak confidently about what they're doing, defending the life of the unborn, defending the life of every mother and father, aunt and uncle, cousin, relative. And then we invite people who are ready to do so after they've come to a place where the pain isn't raw anymore to join us, to stand, to tell the truth. And our biggest event every year is at the March for Life in Washington. The biggest event is at the March for Life for the Americans, but for Canadians, it's at our March for Life here in Ottawa. Abortion has far-reaching effects. I'm the mother to 3 children. We heard Janet talk about really the foundation of abortion. And as a young teenager, I was indoctrinated into the abortion mentality because I was first indoctrinated into the contraceptive mentality. And when I was given the lie that it's just sex, that you could separate the unitive from the procreative, that's how I ended up at a party. I threw off the moral code that had been given to me as a child and as a young teenager to buy into the idea that sex was something recreational. While I didn't intend to have sex the night of this party that I went to, I had dropped my guard. I went into the party thinking I really shouldn't be here. And instead of listening to that little voice inside, I shut it down. I went in and did what everyone else was doing, drinking, drugs. And as people began to leave the room, I looked around and I thought, where did everybody go? And then the fellow who was the instrument to draw me to that party took me by the hand and walked me up a set of stairs. For years, I did not recognize it for what it was, rape. I carried the burden of the guilt of the abortion completely. And it would drive me down a road of self-destruction for 7 years that would lead to suicide, ideation. By God's grace, I did not have a plan, and I didn't execute anything. Although I was slowly destructing through sex, drugs, and alcohol, and serial sexual partners. 7 years in, by God's grace, I turned on the television. David Maines was doing an altar call, inviting viewers to make a call if they were fed up with their life. And I had tried everything. And it was actually in this lovely city of Guelph that my life was turned around. I was in my first year of university, and I bottomed out. And on the eve of my birthday, I turned on the television, saw that phone number, made a call that turned my life around. I met my good now husband of 40 years next month, and we thought we would have a large family. And after 7 years of marriage, we didn't conceive, side effect of abortion. Fallopian tubes were blocked by scar tissue. I would find that out after I experienced an ectopic pregnancy that would rush me to emerge, fighting for my life. We lost the only child that Walter and I ever conceived in our 40 years of marriage to an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured and nearly ended my life. The short life and death of Joseph Michael Steenstra is what opened up for me the post-abortion grief that I had been running away from for 14 years. The first 7 years in self-destruction, I got married, and the next 7 years in avoidance through not sex, drugs, and alcohol, but workaholism, anorexia type behavior, and basically still using alcohol. It was the loss of Joseph Michael that gave me the courage to go back and start gathering up the story. And it was the cognitive dissonance, because it was appropriate to grieve the death of Joseph Michael, who died through the ectopic pregnancy. And this persistent knock on my heart and on my intellect kept nudging me and saying, well, if it's okay to grieve Joseph and to name him, what about when you were that first child? Wasn't that a child? Didn't that person need to be grieved? Didn't that person need to be named? And it was really something spiritually led, because back in the 80s, when I lost Joseph, 1986 to be exact, there was very little post-abortion ministry. It was my own personal journey that would form me and lead me into ministry and connect me to other pioneers that were being led to begin responding to the need of women and men who were hurting and suffering after abortion. So what is the good news? The good news is that there's Project Rachel. The good news is that there's Rachel's Vineyard. The good news is Surrendering the Secret, Forgiven and Set Free. There is so much post-abortion ministry available to us. It's really at our fingertips now. And so I invite you to be helpers. I bless and thank you for all of those who are, and I encourage you to continue the fight, and really for the healing of our Canada. I had a call on the 24th of August this year. 19 years ago, I was invited to speak in Pierrefonds at St. Thomas of Becket Catholic Church by a priest. And he asked me to give a short testimony after every Mass. On that morning, Sunday morning in the spring, a woman was compelled to come to Mass. Her little child begged her to go to Mass. And she heard my short testimony. She came up to me afterwards in tears, saying, I'm pregnant and I'm scheduled for an abortion tomorrow. And because of the grace of the priest who invited me, because of the grace of the courage to go and do that talk, but especially the grace of my husband, driving to Pierrefonds that day, we had to go through Gananoque. And it's a belt where you can get bad weather. And we drove into a storm. And I said to Walter, oh, that's it, we're going home. I was petrified for my life, an abortion connector. And he said, no, we're going. So Walter, being a man and forthright, and I'm on a mission, got us to that parish. Because of his fidelity and the grace that's been given to me because of his spiritual covering, I gave that testimony. And on August 24th, I received a call from the mother of this 19-year-old Gabriel, who's now in his second year at CEGEP. And that's the fruit of fear overcome by prayer. And so courage is not the absence of fear, it's fear overcome by courage. And so thank you. Thank you to each and every one of you who are soldiers in the pro-life movement, who stand shoulder to shoulder in this country. And thank you for all the support that we've known. And please encourage people to go into healing, to come forth, to tell the truth. And if there's anyone who wants to be a regional coordinator to help work with the Silent No More Awareness campaign, please come to the table and pick up some literature. Thank you very much.
So you're up, Dr. Calhoun. Sorry. We'll give it, if you don't mind, I'll give a shortened version and give you a proper introduction tomorrow. But Dr. Calhoun serves as Professor and Vice Chair in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology at the West Virginia University, Charleston, and is directly involved in resident and medical student education. He's authored 90 peer-reviewed articles in obstetric and gynecological literature, presented over 100 scientific papers, participated in over 40 research projects, and has published numerous articles on medical aspects of obstetrics and gynecology. My gosh, and what I know, the little I know of him from other people and just from meeting him today is he is a real messenger of God, I believe, this man. So in his gracious heart to just say yes to me, I'll come up and do this. So we thank you so very much.
Well, thank you very much. What she doesn't realize, anytime you give an Irishman or a Scotsman a mic, it's a dangerous thing, right? Yeah. So I appreciate you inviting me and letting me chat. This is probably one of my favorite topics, not because it's my favorite topic in terms of the effects of it, but preterm birth is where I live. I do high-risk obstetrics. I do maternal fetal medicine primarily, even though I am boarded in general obstetrics, but most of mine is actually high risk. So preterm birth is a very large interest of mine because that's, of course, where most of the neonatal deaths are in all the countries of the world, and also where most of the morbidity is in the preterm births, particularly the extreme preterm birth below about 32 weeks, or 1,500 grams, if you will. So what I thought I would do is just do a little science stuff here, just because I like to write, because I would do research, but just to sort of clarify and give you a sense of how this discussion goes. It's also very interesting that if you look at the way in which it's done in statistics, it's really important to examine the papers and to look at them because, as Disraeli, I believe, said, there's lies, there's damn lies, and there's statistics, right? So you got to be very careful. So let's look at the criteria for causality because that's really important now. And we're going to draw a parallel to this because, of course, every time you talk about causality, immediately our friends on the other side say, well, you can't talk about causality. But let's talk about causality anyway. Well, Dr. Bradford Hill was a very intelligent man. He wrote some criteria in 1964 that are still considered really sort of the way in which you evaluate the medical literature and you evaluate causality in the medical world. So let's go through them just sort of briefly. He talks about the strength of an association or a causality. In other words, is it very high? So when you examine that, is there a very high level of evidence? Is there a very high level of certainty? Well, there's at least 160 papers now that have shown preterm birth is, quote unquote, associated with abortion. Statistically significant, 160 say there's an association. There's 0 that say there's a decreased risk. Okay, that might be helpful to know, but that's not enough, is it? No, we need more. Consistency, that flies with the strength. Is there any paper that shows a decreased risk? No. There are a few papers that say there may not be an increased risk, but no show there is a decreased risk, which is extremely important, looking at the consistency of the findings of all these papers. The specificity of the finding. Is it specific to what you're talking about? Absolutely. We know that if you have an abortion, surgical abortion in particular, the preterm birth risk is consistently and specifically related when you control for other criteria. And this has been done in numerous studies, including very, very nicely done linkage studies with very large databases in places like Finland and Denmark. You have to love the Scandinavians, right? They are very, very orderly, right? They're like Germans, a lot only nicer. So they, I'm sorry, did I offend anybody here? I'm sorry. So now you know why I get in trouble. So they have very, very good data. So we know that when we link that together, they're able to show us very, very specifically that there's an increased risk. Temporally, is it connected to the time? In other words, does this thing happen before your outcome? Well, yes, the abortion occurs, and then you have the preterm birth, not the other way around, right? The preterm birth occurs, and then in temporal time, the preterm birth follows that particular interaction. Okay. Is there a dose response? In other words, if you do more abortions, is it higher? Absolutely. More abortions, increased risk of preterm birth. One abortion, about a 30% increase. If you do 2 or more, 75 to 100%. If you do 3, it may be as high as 200 or 300% increased risk for preterm birth above the baseline. Number 6, is it biologically plausible? That would be very important to know. Is this something that makes actually good sense? And of course it does, because when you instrument the dilated cervix, it causes damage. If you are going into a uterus that is sterile and interrupting a normal process, you set up low-grade infection and inflammatory responses. And we believe this is really why we think part of the etiology, both destruction of tissue, damage, and then also infection, is why we have an increased risk for preterm birth. Is there a coherence? In other words, does all the data seem to show something the same way? And yes, it does. Again, like I pointed out, the data all goes one way. It's coherent for increased risk of preterm birth, never decreased risk for preterm birth. And is there analogy somewhere else? And this is where I like to talk to my friends on the other side and say, well, let's talk about lung cancer then. They say, what do you mean? I said, well, remember, lung cancer is not caused by smoking, right? So why do you keep saying that? Well, it's associated. Oh, so it's associated. So people that don't smoke don't get lung cancer, do they? Well, no, they do get lung cancer, but not like with smoke. So wait just a second. So let me ask the question. So people that don't have abortions don't have preterm birth as much as people have abortions. Well, it's not the same thing. It's not causation. Whoa. You can't have one way, can't have it the other way then. If lung cancer is associated with smoking, then certainly the same data criteria apply, as we've shown, to preterm birth and abortion, and it does. Of course, they still won't shut up, but at least we know that they have to admit that it's the same thing. It's an association, not a causation. They love to play the word games, right? Yes. So what does this do? Well, this actually creates a bit of a conundrum, because we've talked a lot about how people don't want to talk about their abortions. They don't want to talk about how many they've had. Well, I have to ask, in general, with my patients, probably 3 times, how many pregnancies have they had, how many D&Cs have they had any abortions that were surgical, have they had any miscarriages if they had D&Cs? I have to ask it at least 3 times, because it takes that long for them to understand I'm not asking it except because I need to know. I need to know, because I'm going to treat them entirely differently than someone who's not had that. If you've had a D&C of any sort for a miscarriage or an abortion, you're at very increased risk for preterm birth. That means I have to see you every week from 16 to 18 weeks to 24 to 26 weeks and look at a cervical length every week. Because if it shortens up, I'm going to have to treat you, and treat you differently than I would someone who doesn't have that risk. So it directly impacts your care. The second thing it will possibly lead to is a cervical tie or cerclage. Not just medical therapy, but I may have to put a stitch in you. So I have to know these things. So it radically changes, this procedure radically changes how I take care of you. And all of us now do that in my country. We all know this. This is not any sort of secret. No one likes to talk about it, but we all treat our patients this way. The final thing that really is very interesting, and there's 2 more parts of this that are really probably the worst part of this, if we talk about, is the fact that now, not only have they had the abortion or the termination of their pregnancy and having to deal with that, now they've also placed their subsequent pregnancy at risk. They deliver a baby below 28 or 32 weeks, 1,500 grams, and now that baby's very sick and may very well have significant medical problems and or life-changing problems, including cerebral palsy, blindness, deafness, and learning disabilities, all because of something they did years before and now carries forward in their life. The final thing that's really interesting, Dr. Brin's going to talk about this tomorrow, the other double damning thing is not only have they increased their risk for breast cancer, right, with the first abortion prior to a term pregnancy, now if you look at the literature, not mine mind you, but the literature in the world, including the good Denmark studies, less than 32-week deliveries also increases your breast cancer significantly. So now you got the triple whammy: preterm birth, sick baby, and now you got an increased risk for breast cancer, all based on one thing that you did that supposedly wasn't going to hurt you and was going to be not a problem whatsoever. And that's the part of this that's now there. And people have to truly come to grips with and understand and admit that the data really is there in spite of what they do say. When I say there's 160 studies, they always try to poo-poo me, and I say, well, just find one then that says it helps. That's all I'm asking. You find the one that says it makes it better, then we can talk. 160 to 1, I still think I probably win, but maybe not. Maybe in horse racing you don't win, I don't know. And so basically, in my world, I have to know about surgical procedures, and particularly abortion. Preterm birth is endemic now. The reason it's endemic is because of abortion. There's no doubt. I mean, it's clear that the lockstep with D&Cs and termination of pregnancies, it's never going to get better because they just keep doing abortions. It's not anything to do with anything else. It's truly, truly linked to abortion. And they're starting to actually come to grips with it, even though they don't like to admit it. But they're going to have to because it really does exist. Thank you very much for your time.
I think we'll have a few moments for questions if you would like to ask any questions. And I'm sorry we don't have a mic on the floor. So if it's the panelists are seated. So if you feel okay to come up and ask it here, so that for the recordings, but also for everybody else, it might be easier. Are you okay to come up? Yes. I'll go down. Just watch yourself.
This question's for Dr. Calhoun. A miscarriage is a natural a situation for a woman, whereas an abortion is a forced one. Does that have any effect on the preterm birth in terms of, is it more likely or less likely if it's a miscarriage that you would have a preterm birth?
That's a good question. Actually, it's a surgical procedure. So now, I didn't go into a lot of detail. Now we've actually gone to 3 different ways of dealing with most miscarriages. When I did this, we used to do all these D&Cs, not realizing how much damage we were doing. So most of us don't do D&Cs for miscarriages anymore unless there's a real emergency generally. We now either do just basically watchful waiting, as we call it, or expectant management, or sometimes we'll use medication to try to help the patients complete the miscarriage if they want to do it that way. But we don't do hardly any D&Cs anymore for miscarriage for that reason. But the same risks apply because anytime you instrument surgically the uterus, you set up possible infection or inflammation, and so we really know that we've stopped doing it. So there is a very much increased risk with spontaneous miscarriages as well. Not quite as high as probably as abortion, but it's still there.
Are there other questions? Are you okay to come up, Edward?
Yes, hello. I'd like to ask Dr. Calhoun to respond to two points that are sometimes brought up by pro-choice people. One is that to say that there are complications from abortion is probably true, they'll say, but aren't there complications and risks associated with all elective surgical procedures? And so the risks for abortion are not higher than they are for other kinds of surgery. The second argument is that some people say that the risks, the only thing that the risks associated with surgical abortions should be telling us is that there should be a stronger push for chemical abortions through pills earlier in the pregnancy, which they would say have lower risks and complications. Well, how do you respond to those arguments?
The 2 questions are valid. The first question about looking at the complication rates or the idea of risk to surgical procedures does apply somewhat. On the other hand, abortions that are surgical are elective procedures. Also, we do know that unlike a lot of other procedures, there are long-term risks to abortions that are different, including the mental health risks, which are very significant, which people, again, don't like to acknowledge, but are long-term, over years, and as we've pointed out with our speakers, over years that these happen. The second increase is in mortality rates, which you usually don't see that persist over years with most procedures that are done as an elective procedure. That's not something that needs to be done generally. You don't see the same things. In other words, over time, the mortality rates are increased, all-cause mortality rates. The other thing that's very interesting is that if you look at the data and try to compare, abortion to childbirth, it's very difficult because it's like comparing apples and oranges. And I've been thinking about this a lot because if you could look at and develop an algorithm saying how many women die from 6-week pregnancy and how many die from 6-week abortion, well, it's going to be completely different because you're not having anything done at 6 weeks in a pregnancy, right? It's just going to continue to go on, and you can't compare a 39-week delivery to a 6-week abortion. So there's the mortality, the mental health, then there's the breast cancer risk, and then there's also the preterm birth, which are all significant and are not related to other procedures that I'm aware of. I mean, you don't see increased preterm birth because somebody has perhaps has a mole removed or some other thing done. I mean, it's clearly related to the abortion, and it's serious stuff. It's not like this is minor stuff. This is a huge cost in human suffering and a huge cost in money, and really significant. The second one is actually very interesting. Actually, the complication rates for medical abortions are actually higher than they are for surgical. And people don't like to hear that, but it's true. It's much higher for medical abortions. And particularly if you have to complete a medical abortion with a surgical abortion, then the preterm rates go up by 3 and 4 times or more above baseline. So, yes, they're higher. Chemical abortion, yeah. Medical abortion you do with side attack or you do with mifepristone and misoprostol. Those are much higher complication rates than surgical abortions are. Yes.
Brian, address the consent. The gentleman asked you about, aren't all procedures, don't they all have risk? Well, yeah, but they're told about them.
Right. Well, that's the part of this whole, and the other part that Keith talked about, which is critically important, is that if you read the American colleges and the British medical OBGYN, that consent is a process, right? Nowhere in my world, in obstetrics and gynecology, unless it's an emergency, right, like a person who's bleeding to death for possibly a miscarriage or an emergency cesarean section, do you not do a process of consenting. You would never walk into the room and have a lady say, I really want my hysterectomy today, and say, well, that's great, I've got time at 3 o'clock, let's just sign you up and hop on over, right? That doesn't happen. Not for elective procedures in particular. It's a long process, it's multiple visits, and the person who's the surgeon is supposed to be the one who meets them face-to-face and gets the consent. Not somebody else, and not the day of the surgery, and not when the woman's in the stirrups and never had a chance to meet them and never meet them again. That's not the way it works. They would like you to believe that on the other side, but that's not true. And even the professional agencies say, you have to have a process. It's not signing a piece of paper, it's a process. And there's no way there can be a process without time and without meeting someone and getting to know them and their particular situation. That's
with abortion, they don't give that.
They get none of, in spite of what they say, no. In fact, if you talk to them, in fact, the last thing I read was, I just go in and I talk to them and I do their consent then. I go, well, how can you do that? Number one, I don't believe you. I'm sorry, just because I've talked to enough women who's had abortions. They said they never met the doctor. They walked in, they did the procedure and walked out. Their doctor did not get the consent. So you can't have an informed consent, as Keith says, unless they understand. And that's why you have to face-to-face, and that's why you have to talk to people so they understand what's going to happen, what the complications are, what the results are, so that they can understand what you're talking about. And everybody communicates in a little different way, and some people understand better than others, so you have to make sure that you get that consent, and that's why it's a process. It's not signing a piece of paper. It's so they really understand what's going on based on their situation, both their educational and the other things they know about. It's a completely different discussion than just walking in the room and say, okay, yeah, I got time at 3 o'clock, just wander in there and do that right now.
Why hasn't any of this gone through the courts yet?
Why hasn't it gone through the courts is the question? I don't know. I can't. I've tried to ask that question multiple times to the ladies I know. I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, it has a little bit, but
somewhat
more.
Yeah, but I think it's coming.
Is it different in a hospital procedure versus a clinic procedure for abortion? This consent process?
She's asking, is it different in a clinic or in a hospital? Well, they would like you to believe it is, but it's not. Consents for surgical procedures, or actually any procedure you would do, even if I was going to perhaps insert one of the next planons that they were talking about, if I'm going to do anything to anybody, I'm supposed to get a consent, either verbal or written, so they understand what's going to happen and what we're going to do. I can't even do a biopsy really without getting, I can't go up to somebody and say, I'm just going to take that ward off without their consent, right? I have to get a consent, otherwise it's a battery. It's a criminal charge, it's assault and a battery, and I can go to jail for that. I have to have your consent. So it's supposed to be the same thing that's going on, particularly for a procedure that is considered unique by the courts, actually. in the United States. It's considered unique abortionist because it ends the life of the baby. It's a unique procedure that you should have to get an informed consent so they understand what's happening. Even though they all say, oh, they all know. Well, if they all know, it won't hurt them for you to remind them and to get the consent and to do what you need to do and make sure everybody's on the same understanding of this. And the real issue is, of course, in my opinion, is that virtually nobody goes back to their abortionist for care, right? They don't go back because they're not their doctor, really, right? That's not their doctor. My patients come back to me because I'm their physician, right? We see them back, we take care of them. Yes, sir.
Doctor, what are the ill effects of a chemical abortion from a medical point of view?
Well, talking about the medical, the problem with the medical abortions or doing those is the fact that there's, number one, they're unsupervised, okay? You're doing this at home. So it's unsupervised. It also has a higher risk of bleeding and infection because it's unsupervised and it happens over several days. Most of the complications are related to hemorrhage and or infection. So that's the real issue is they're not supervised. This is not something like you're going to go home and take a Tylenol. This is you're going to go home and you're going to have a miscarriage and you're going to do it at home. And all that stuff we talked about 2 and 3 days. That's all very real. They're going to send cramp and bleed for 2 or 3 days, and it's going to not, and it's unsupervised, and that's the key, really. Yes, that is, you basically, and of course it's even talking about telemedicine. You go in on your Facebook or you go in on your FaceTime. There's the screen up there, and they talk to you, and they push the button, and the pill basically pops out, or you get it, and then you're gone your merry way, like it's dispensing an aspirin or something like that, or an M&M, right?
Read my writing?
Yes, I can. It says, what are OBGYNs doing to prevent preterm birth by counseling their patients who come in to them seeking an abortion? They don't acknowledge it. Since the American College says it doesn't cause it, they don't believe they have to counsel for it. There are some jurisdictions they do. Texas, I think, does, and some other states have some language in there. I think Indiana does. I think Alabama may. But basically, because the American College says it doesn't happen or it's not related to that, they don't feel like they have to. The question is, abortionists don't perform abortions in hospital. It depends on the jurisdiction in my country. Certain states require that you have them be done in the hospitals. For instance, I think Indiana still does. Most of them say, no, you can have it in a clinic wherever you want to have it, which is unlicensed generally and unsupervised. And basically, they are like you're going to the doctor's office and they just happen to do abortions, surgical abortions there, which is astounding, actually. Yeah, they're not even licensed in my state. In West Virginia, they're not licensed. Now, tattoo parlors are, and beauty parlors are. You laugh, I'm not kidding you, okay? And they don't even inspect them in West Virginia because they're not under any sort of licensure. Yeah. But you have to inspect the veterinary clinic, right? And they have to have a license. I'm not kidding. This is not made up. You can't believe this stuff when you start doing it. Everybody thinks you're like kind of crazy, but you're not. It's really true stuff. Gosnell, and they have a licensure actually in Pennsylvania. They just didn't go over and inspect or do anything. Yeah, absolutely.
How do you feel about the fact that the OBGYN college, or what we call a college here in Canada, how do you feel about them barefaced lying about the reality and about all the research and what? You're part of this group of highly educated, supposedly dedicated doctors, and yet they are quite willing to lie for the abortion industry. And lie either because they make money doing it or because either way they make money, right? They make money working on preterm babies, or they make money, at the beginning by aborting the women that come in to have preterm babies.
Well, this is the challenge that you have to deal with when you're in particularly obstetrics and gynecology today, is you just have to realize that there are people in there that are compromised both politically and financially. And so I can either throw my hands up and be like a lot of my colleagues, put my head in the sand, or I can be, as we've talked about, I can be like Queen Esther, which I will say, for such a time as this. Not being arrogant, I'm saying God drags you kicking and screaming into this. This is not something I chose. I will be like you. I'm dragged kicking and screaming into this because I don't want to do it. It's dirty, unpleasant business. You get treated very badly because you're an unprofessional. You're whatever they say you are. But that's what I'm called to do. Plus, it can be a whole lot of fun sometimes. To just be that little guy, little guy in the back. Right? Yeah. So it can be fun. And we are making an impact. You know you're making an impact. This is how you know you're making an impact. When they have to force people to try to make them do abortions. When they have to make a completely new board in the United States American board to teach people how to do abortions. Can you believe that? You have to be taught how to do, it's called, advanced family planning. It's just abortion training because nobody will do it. And you realize that's movement in despair and not going to go anywhere because you can't make people do bad stuff, right, like this. It doesn't work. So that's how you know you're winning, when they have to try to force people to do something. Now you know you're on the right side of it, and the momentum is starting to turn the other way.
Yay.
Yes, sir.
Do doctors stateside have to sign a Hippocratic oath as well to do no harm?
He's talking about the Hippocratic Oath. Oh, I'm sorry, you really are out of it. That hasn't been done for 30 years. No, very passé. Yeah, nobody takes the Hippocratic Oath anymore, hardly. No, they really don't. No. No, they don't. Not in the United States. Nobody takes it. Hardly anybody takes it. I mean, there are a few people that do. There's a Hippocratic Society has been formed, and students have been going back and taking it, the Hippocratic Oath, and they graduate. But the Hippocratic Oath is not sworn virtually in any medical school anymore for the abortion reason. That's why it went away. Yeah, because, well, you can't swear that. That's old-fashioned. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's how it is.
Make a comment about doctors and pharmaceutical companies and money. Because follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money.
You will find where
Follow the money.
the evil is.
Yeah.
Follow the money.
Yeah, follow the money.
Whether it's in politics, whether it's in medicine, wherever you want to see a problem, follow the money.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
Pharmaceutical companies
doesn't
are
change.
making billions, whether there's surgical abortions or whether there's medical abortions. They're making billions. And they, click, are intending to make billions more.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's,
they want to keep this
gravy train going,
rolling.
the gravy train going, yeah. Well, that's why they get irritated, but that's why it's, like I said, it's fun to sort of try to derail that train, yeah. Other question for anybody? Yes?
There is,
Just, I'll wrap up, or give me a minute when you're done.
no, okay, it was actually for Teresa.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead. Somebody had another
The
question?
question was-
Oh, for Teresa, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Teresa, what's the difference between Project Rachel and Rachel's Vineyard?
Oh, that's a great question. Project Rachel and Rachel's Vineyard kind of, I think it started as one in many ways. Project Rachel is done with more along the line of individual counseling. So the person comes in, that we hear their story. The story is the important part, and we take them through a 9-step process of grieving, reconciliation, forgiveness. Rachel's Vineyard does very much the same thing, but it's on a weekend retreat. As opposed to that individual. So a group of people are together. They go through the same, to a degree, stages and healing process. It's just done in 2 different ways.
Very much.
Just want to tell you, if anybody, I did bring some Project Rachel brochures. If anybody wants to take some, they're on the table here.
Just a couple of comments. If anybody would like some information on myfagamizo, which is what it's called here, RU486, or medical, I like to call it chemical abortion. We did do I think it was an amazing booklet. And the Finnish study, which was done in Finland for using data collected by the government, and they actually compared around about 22,000 women who'd had surgical abortion and 21,000 who'd had chemical abortion. And the risks for women with a chemical abortion is 4 times greater. The infection, sorry, I'm losing it, the hemorrhage, going to hospitals, and I think it was 1 in 20 women had to have a surgical abortion on top. So here in Canada, they've sold it to us as the gold standard of abortion, and yet I thought I'd never hear myself say it. It's safer if women have a surgical abortion than a chemical abortion. So if you want that information, I can email a digital booklet to you. Be very happy to. And then in 2011, when all was going on with Gosnell, We did some research across Ontario and looked at the way all clinics, all facilities were inspected. And we found that some of the abortion clinics were not inspected. They were not included under it, and some of the inspections of any facility, they being the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, who are supposed to be doing this, didn't like to go in, or they found that the colleagues that were going on these inspections didn't like to just drop in on facilities. So they'd let them know they were coming. And then they were supposed to go and actually just pick out 12 files and take them, whereas apparently they asked them for the files. So, I mean, if you're going to have the file where Dr. Smith actually mismanaged Mrs. Jones's surgery and she died, you're not going to give that for inspection, are you? So at that time, we called it See No Evil, Hear No Evil, Speak No Evil, and Murder in Plain Sight. We did two reports on that. And at the end of it, we said Gosnell could be operating here in our province quite easily. So we have an awful lot of work to do. Are there any other questions for any of the other panelists at this time, or would you like a nice sort of half-hour break?
Can I just say one thing?
I don't know. Should we let him? Yeah. Okay.
Jackie was mostly joking when she said you're going to have a test on this. There's so much information. I just want you to understand, on the disc I talked about, the DVD, on the emotional risks of abortion, you are hearing what Teresa said and Angelina, plus 6 other women and a man and their story. So it just helps reinforce all of these things. As Dr. Calhoun has said, all the complications, he explains it in that as well. So I know I sound like a used car salesman, not to offend any used car salesman, but thanks, Jackie.
You're so welcome.